Claire Curran.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would also like to add my acknowledgement of the work done by my Labour colleagues, the Honourable Marion Street and Raymond Ho, on this bill as the representatives for the Labour Party during the Select Committee discussion on this bill. I've gone back and I spoke on this bill briefly in the first reading, and I've been back and had a bit of a read about what I said and why I said it, and I'd like to confine my remarks on the Objectionable Publications and Indecency legislation bill to the issues that concerned me back in the first reading and still concern me following the return of this bill to the House. And there's no doubt, and we'll put on the record, that Labour is supporting this bill, that the behaviours that it is seeking to address or to provide penalties for are absolutely critical, that the abuse of children, but not just the abuse of children, but the actions of child pornographers and people who use and disseminate and produce objectionable publications and distribute them should be condemned, and there's no doubt about that, and I think nobody's going to deny that. My particular issue with this piece of legislation, and another one which I'm going to mention shortly, is its the absolute important nature for this Parliament in 2015 to be thinking very seriously about how the legislation that impacts in the physical environment meshes and with legislation that we bring before the House that impacts on the online environment. The internet is not a sentient being, despite what I think the point that the previous speaker was making. It's a means of transmission. It's a means of connecting and communicating. It's not a thing in itself. There have to be people creating the actions and doing the communications. So the behaviours in the physical world and the behaviours in the online world and the penalties and laws that we put around them have to have some consistency. And it's my real concern that what is starting to emerge is a discrepancy between those things, and I know we're going to see further debate and angst around the implications of that, so I still, I am putting on the record that that I remain concerned about this legislation and whether all of those issues have been thought through. And one of the reasons that I make that comment is that when looking at the list of submitters, of which there are 8, I think, and they're all extremely worthy submitters, there's no doubt about that, but the submitters on this legislation did not include the organisations and the people that are doing a lot of thinking and mulling over of some of these implications, and which raises a further point, and that is how we as a Parliament, and how in particular the government, which is putting the laws on the table for debate, is actually communicating with the wider public around legislation that's being put before the House. And I think we have to ask ourselves, is our process of communicating, inviting submissions, ensuring that there is good consultation and engagement before we pass these laws, is it sufficient? Personally, I don't think it is, and I think that that we're not doing enough work to get the legislation, the draft legislation out there to the community to have those discussions. We expect everyone to come to us, and we expect everyone to just know that these laws are out there. In legislation such as this, I think there could have been perhaps a more extensive engagement process, and there's another piece of legislation coming before the Parliament, back to the Parliament no doubt soon, called the Harmful Digital Communications Bill, which also attempts to create a new set of penalties that impact on the electronic digital environment that is different and separate to the physical environment. And I think that this raises some significant issues for us as to whether we're getting it right. I think it's less controversial with this bill before the House at the moment, much more controversial with the Harmful Digital Communications Bill. And I'd like to, sort of signal that there is going to be, and there does need to be, a wider discussion in the community around that particular bill, which introduces a new civil enforcement regime and a new criminal penalty that only applies in the online environment. Nothing like this has been done anywhere in the world. That has created a new penalty that could mean prison, that only applies in the online environment. So that's significant, and it's very important that we're not having piecemeal discussions about these things. And the point that my colleague Jacinda Ardern made at the beginning is the importance of having a coherent strategy around a justice strategy, and not coming up with pieces of legislation in a knee-jerk reaction. And I'm not meaning that in an extremely pejorative way, but I'm saying that any legislation such as this should fit within a wider strategy, and should be very careful to mesh not only with other pieces of legislation, but also with, especially if it's talking about the online, the electronic environment, that there's been a lot of careful thinking about that. And I just don't think it's happened. I don't think that thinking is going on. I think we've got this sort of, we have a problem, therefore we must do something about it, and here's the thing to do something about it response. And I am concerned that the unintended consequences of some of our approaches to this will have impacts down the track. So one remedy is to ensure that we've done the right consultation with the right groups, with the right people who are doing the good thinking around this. That hasn't happened, as far as I'm concerned, in this piece of legislation. One of the issues that has been raised, and I think it was raised in the regulatory impact statement, was around the difficulty in predicting the effect of an increase in maximum penalty will have on reducing the offence. And I think there's been a little bit of discussion about that already. But two of the submitters on this legislation was the Dunedin Community Law Centre. I must say that the Dunedin Community Law Centre are a pretty awesome organisation. They submit on almost every piece of legislation, can I say, and I'm pretty proud of them. Just giving them a bit of a shout out here tonight. Shout out to the Dunedin. Oh, it was started by David Parker, our own David Parker, but they're a very assiduous organisation that really get out there and put the work into submitting. And the Salvation Army, which pointed out that increasing the penalties for objectionable publications offences could distort relativity with other offences by treating some physical offending as less serious than the depiction of that same offending. And the Salvation Army submitted that this created an anomaly, as physical crimes should be punished more severely than objectionable publications offences, and the Dunedin Community Law Centre suggested that this may send the wrong message to those physically abusing children. Well, I rest my case. This is the physical environment versus the online environment. Are we doing enough thinking about the impact of the new laws that we're bringing in this environment, and what are the implications for that? I don't have all the answers to that, but I just don't think we're really thinking it through.